Good morning, welcome back to the channel. 102nd video this is going to be, and it's almost to the day 6 months since I made my first video with Chris Sale up in the Lake District. So there's quite a few now to watch, but this one today is going to be about processing. I've always believed that having a high megapixel sensor camera allows you to do something else which a lower megapixel camera won't do, which is crop in very tightly and still have a perfectly usable frame from the point of view of composition. It's raining outside, so I'm not really going to go out and take pictures today, so I thought let's just have a nice session on the computer here, and I'll talk you through what I do with an image. The image in question is going to be one I took in the Alps this time, or nearly this time last year, which is on the screen now, and I'll show it. It'll be in the sequence of the video following, and the one that I produce, I'll put both of them up, and I'll then talk you through what I did to the original image to make the second image. Now, getting back to my point, the point is high megapixel cameras do allow you to come away with a significant crop on an image, and that then is still a perfectly usable and printable image in its own right. Now, you would argue, well, why would you actually want to crop in very tightly? Well, there's two reasons for it. The first is these images were taken from a helicopter, and although I had a zoom lens on, I had no chance to actually change the zoom to a wider zoom lens, say the 16 to 35. I put the 24 to 70 on, and quite a few times I found that I couldn't frame the image that I wanted. And also, secondly, in a helicopter you've got fractions of a second to take images because it's constantly moving, and even when it's hovering, which it did a few times, it's still, you haven't got very long, and you're in there with other people, and conditions are not perfect for ideally scouting a shot, because it's somewhere you've never been before. You might have seen it from the ground, but there's no way you can anticipate what it's going to be like in the air. So you often actually don't get much chance to do anything other than take a relatively wide image and then in post-processing choose the images that, or the parts of the image that you want. Okay, you might want the image in its wide form, and you might have been lucky and got a stunning image just from directly out of the camera, but I've reviewed quite a few of the images I took in the Alps, and I must have taken probably a couple of hundred in the hour flight we were flying around, and a lot of them are too wide, and there's a lot of smaller subsections of the image which in themselves are stunning, but they get lost because of the sheer volume of the rest of the information that the picture's got. So this video is about actually taking smaller parts of existing images, and for those of you that would say, well, you should frame it up properly, there are situations where you can't, and that's one example of it, but there are others as well. If you're, for instance, on a holiday and you've got your family with you, you don't have time to set things up properly, you don't necessarily have all the gear with you, you might just have a pretty versatile zoom lens on, but you don't get time because of family constraints and pressures. You don't get time to really spend the time to scout out the shot that you want and to frame it as you want, which then means you come back home, you've got images, and you will almost certainly in some cases want to actually zoom in on them or change them or recompose them. And again, number one, high megapixel camera makes that much more possible. It doesn't stop you with lower megapixel cameras, it just means that your chances of printing anything large are relatively small. So this is about actually seeing images within images as much as anything, and that's the exercise I've been doing with my shots from the Alps. So without further ado, you've seen the two images. What I'll do is I'll switch over to screen mode, put on the boom microphone, all the bits and paraphernalia that go with working with the computer, and I'll talk you through the changes I made to actually get the image, and I'll talk you through my rationale as to why I did it, why I changed lighting levels, why I changed colour balances and other such things. So let's get on with it and see what I produce. Okay, here we are in Lightroom, and I've got the raw image unprocessed actually on the screen here, and as you can see the picture's got an overall blue cast. It's quite a startling image. It's the front edge of the glacier on the Mont Blanc glacier, and we were about 2/3 of the way up the mountain in the helicopter, and we were only about maybe 20 to 30 meters away from the actual ice, and as you can see, this is the underlying rock that's been worn away over time as the glaciers sort of passed down the valley, and as the glaciers are receding, it's leaving this smooth rock, which is all very nice and full of features. Also the staining from the glacier itself, and the original glacial valley is still visible up here. My problem with this image is that this was taken just after sunrise, early on an October morning, and the bright sun was over here off to the right and shielded by a mountain to the extent some of it's in shadow, some of it isn't. And I love the way the sunlight's lighting up the edges of the pieces of ice sticking up on the glacier here. But for me, this image doesn't really work as it is, because this area of sky up in the top right hand corner is drawing your eye out of the picture. There's some really nice detail where the sun's lighting this up here in this area in the top right below where the sky is. But for me, the main sort of actor, if you like, in this image is this curve here at the front edge of the ice and the rocks that are underneath it, and also this line of rocks disappearing into the distance. Now, this, bear in mind, was very early in the morning and the sunlight was low, and consequently it was very warm, but this picture is very cold. So I think the first thing we need to do to it is actually bring the colour temperature up, so that it's more representative of what I actually saw. Now, that obviously is nowhere near as blue, and it's got a large amount of warmth in it, but that is closer to what we actually had, as I recall. So the first thing I'm going to do is just run an auto exposure setting on it, just to get the various settings closer to where I normally have them as a starting point. I'm going to take the highlights right down. I nearly always do this, but I'm going to bring the shadows up slightly to bring a bit more detail out in this rock here, and I'll do that like so. Now, the whites are not clipping. They are just not clipping now. I'll just move them up slightly, and I'll just bring the blacks up a little bit so they're not clipping. Hence the clipping warnings have disappeared here. Now, texture I'm going to bring up a fair bit because I want to see the structure of the ice, and as you can see if you zoom in, there's really quite a lot of detail here, but there's also a lot of noise. This was taken at ISO 250, which isn't particularly high, but as you can see there is quite a degree of noise, especially in this sort of snowy area here. So I'm just going to sort out noise reduction a bit and bring some in just to lose the detail of the noise in this snow, and I'll do that with a little bit more noise reduction than that. And I'm going to sharpen the image first, and what I'll do is I want to create the mask that I want, so I'll press Alt key and I'll move the slider across until just the edges and the fine edges of the ice are visible as being masked, the white areas being the mask where the sharpening will apply, and the black areas where it won't. So I want to be quite brutal and just limit that significantly. So we'll release the Alt key, and now I've got fairly nice sharp edges, but the radius is too noticeable, this haloing. So let me just zoom back out, and you can see when the picture actually finishes refreshing itself. This is the latest Lightroom I'm using, and it's significantly quicker than the previous version. It only updated a few days ago, and I'm quite pleased it's improved, and there's a few other features which are really quite helpful as well. But what I now want to do is I want to crop this image because I don't want that sky in there, and I want to make this area of the image more powerful. So let's get the cropping tool and let's just take it down, and I want to include as much of that ice in the top right as I can, and I also want to include, not clip off this little piece here because it's leading out of the frame otherwise. We've got some nice lines in the ice, in the rock structures here leading into the eye, into the frame, and also this line coming up here of the ice is leading the eye into the frame reasonably well. But I've managed to get a bit of sky in there, so I'll need to pull this right hand side down a bit further, and I'll pull it down and just reposition the crop slightly And that to me is a little bit more pleasing. We've got a line coming in here in the form of the top of this piece of ice. We've got another line coming in here, which is bringing you into the sort of central part of the image, which is really this area here. So that is the crop I'm happy with on that image. And now it's strikingly more powerful as an image, I feel. But I've got a lot of what is, I'm sure it's not clipped, but this looks like it's blown a little bit. And I've got clipping indicating up there, so I'm going to bring down the whites a bit more, which that's now, these are still looking a bit blown out, but I'll deal with that in a minute. What I want to do is introduce warmth, and although we've got the warmth up here across the whole image, if I set the white balance picker and say in this shadow this snow should be white, that now is a pretty representative colour for the front of the glacier and close to what I remember it, but I'll tweak those in a minute. But what I'm aware of is here, this area that's in sunlight, which is all of this area, that doesn't look to me warm. It looks, it just doesn't pick up the sun's warmth in the morning. So what I'm going to do is paint over that area with a big brush, this top right hand side here, and hopefully just clipping into the ice, but I'll sort that out in a minute. I'm going to go and produce a range mask now, which will pull out the darker colours. I'm not interested in the whites, I'm interested in the darker shades of the rocks in this. So what I'm going to do is create a luminance mask which pretty much only picks out the rocks, and as you can see, the darker areas here now are being picked out in red, which means the masking will affect that, and there's virtually none of the snow and the ice picked out at all. And I'm just going to bring this into this lower area as well, because these rocks were more colourful than they appear, so I don't want to leave them looking cold. So I've created that mask, I'm quite happy with that. So the next thing I'll do is turn that off, and now what I'll do is warm up those areas that I've selected. And I'm going to do it quite a lot, and I'm going to bring up the saturation on there as well, because I want those rocks to look meaningful in the image. And this is the new slider that's been introduced in Lightroom, which is a hue and saturation slider. You can alter the balance of the colours, and I don't want it in fine mode because it moves too slowly. I want to see what the effect is. You can see moving this is changing the colour of the darker areas. I don't want it green, I want it warmer. So I'll put it down a little bit more. That's too much. It's a slightly delayed response. Okay, so that now looks warmer than it did before, which I'm quite pleased about. I might even warm that up even more and push that slider right across the right hand side. Now this area of rock looks as if it's been lit up by the sun, so I'm going to create another mask, and this one's going to be on the snow and ice, because I want to enhance this to pick out a little bit more of the hues and the colours, because it was much more vibrant than this image looks when I was there, as I recall. So what I'm going to do is increase the saturation on that. But I haven't created a mask. I need a luminance mask because I don't want this affecting the dark areas. So I'm going to lift the mask up to exclude the darker areas and only include the relatively light coloured areas, which that looks about right to me. So now what I'm going to do is to increase the whites to make that ice flow more vibrant. I'm going to increase the shadows very slightly just to bring out this area here, which is a cleft in the ice face here, and we'll put the texture up a reasonable amount to make it pop more, and I won't dehaze it but I will saturate that a fair bit more. Now, I'm quite happy with that. Reasonably happy with that image as it is at the moment. Now the next effect I'm going to apply is I'm going to put a vignette on it to pull the eye into the picture more, and I'm going to turn the vignette off for the highlights, which is I think this is a new slider. I can't recall if it is, but I don't remember using it before. It means the vignette won't affect the highlighted areas as much. What I normally do is I normally put a lot of vignette on and then back it off to the point that its impact on the image is more subtle, which is roughly, I'm happy with that there. That looks about right to me for my taste. So I've noticed we're clipping the blacks after bringing that vignette in, so I've just moved the black balance up a little bit more, and I'm going to increase the overall whites on the picture to the point they nearly clip, because it was a very bright morning. Now that to me is looking a lot more like the image that I saw, but the greens in this, I'm going to put the Hue Saturation Luminosity filter in. I'm going to mess around a little bit with the luminance on, I think it's the blues or the aquas. I think it's probably the blues. Oh, there's a very slight delay. I'm not seeing the effect I'm making. Yes, it is. It's the blues. I'm going to bring the blues up a bit just to pull some more light into these areas on the glacier. And I'll move across the saturation and put a fair bit of colour into the rocks, and they're in the browny reddy area, and that's brought some nice orange glow from the sun in there, which is a bit extreme, so I'll take that back a bit and that one back a bit, and that's, I think, is quite pleasing. But I'm going to brighten the blues, which should affect, that's not right, that's saturation. I'm not on saturation, I want to be on luminance. I've already brightened the whites quite a bit, and I think the saturation can go down very slightly there just to de-emphasize the blue in these sections of the glacier. Now that's looking quite a nice image. I quite like that image. It's more powerful than the original if we go back to the original. And it is more colourful in terms of the actual true colours. So those are the edits that I've made to the picture. That's the sequence I went through, and I think that's quite a pleasing image now. So I'll put the two images up and let you have a decent close look at them next. Well, you've seen the process, I've talked you through it, you've seen the images. No more to say than I hope you found this informative. It might not be the way everyone wants to work, it's the way I work, and I'm quite happy with the images I come away with on occasions from these sort of exercises. So thanks again for watching. Please give it a thumbs up if you like the video, because it does help the channel, and also please comment, because I love getting comments, and it's nice to interact with you guys and see what your thoughts are. And well, until the next video, have a good time.